Who believes that man, by our nature, is condemned to a hopeless struggle against ourselves? That he doesn't believe man is a social animal. He believes man is sadistic and naturally inclined toward particular interest and particular self-interest, and that we have an intrinsic need to kill. And in that need to kill, we hold on to sanctions that we know are futile, we know are hopeless in what they're designed ostensibly to be performing. And so now I move to the section, I'm going to try to move to the section of the presentation that probably deserves a lot more time than I'm going to give it. And we can come back and revisit this in question-answer period if you need to or would like to. But it's my effort to try to talk about the evolution of these principles of justice and compassion. If you look at the literature on punishment, you look at the philosophy of punishment, there's often justice and compassion are juxtaposed against one another. That what the law promises is justice, but what salvation promises is compassion. And we've got a contest between whether we're going to be compassionate or just in our response to crime. Camus proposes that you can do one and the same by advocating this punitive compassion that he talks about. I'm going to talk about four different stages of society and four different stages in the evolution of punishment, and particularly the death penalty. The first stage is, I call pre-modern, or some people refer to it as ancient societies. I'm never sure when these periods are and exactly what the dates are that surround these particular periods. But simply note that if you look at ancient literature, if you look at the literature of ancient civilizations, you note that in Greece, in ancient Rome and Greece, and in most pre-Christian periods, what happened? No. Well, I'll just put them all up here. Try to. All right. In pre-modern or ancient times, the death penalty existed, and there was no question about their use of the death penalty, but the death penalty existed with a certain level of dignity for citizens. For example, Socrates himself, the great philosopher, some people call the first philosopher, Socrates was executed for crimes. He was executed for challenging authority and for asking questions. But he was given the opportunity to kill himself. He was given hemlock and asked to drink it. He was even given opportunity to leave Athens and go in exile to a foreign land. But because of his strong commitment to the values of his society, he took the punishment, and he died under the executioner's power. The executioner happened in his instance to be himself. He was given hemlock, as all citizens were given the right to do in ancient societies. We separated the punishments for citizens from the punishments for non-citizens or slaves, principally in the level of brutality and the level of viciousness that was used in the actual carrying out of the sanction. And if you look at the literature on punishment systems in ancient societies, you have the drawing and quartering, you have the burning at the stake, you have the beheadings and all kinds of brutal and horrific kind of forms of execution that were reserved for non-humans. They were reserved for non-citizens, people who were of a lesser status and a lesser society. We then move into modern society where punishment systems were supposedly becoming enlightened, and this is the period of enlightenment. And what happens in the period of enlightenment is both positive science, positivism, the value of the scientific approach to punishment, and also positive law, or the replacement of from sacred laws and sacred punishments in the pre-modern periods to periods of punishment that were driven by man-made laws and man-made sanctions rather than divinely inspired, sacred kind of sanctions. And that's the concept of positive law. And at this point in time, we see efforts being made in societies to perfect, through science, the administration of punishment, not to stop executions, but to kind of make the process more scientifically designed and perfect through the advents of science. The examples that I've given you don't particularly relate to the death penalty, but they're familiar to most people in terms of the evolution of enlightenment and in the development of punishment. The panopticon, or the development of a punishment system, a prison where all behavior can be viewed at all times. Jeremy Bentham, who, by the way, was opposed to the death penalty himself and worked hard to abolish the death penalty in England. A more contemporary version of this modern scientific approach to punishment can be seen in the work of Norval Morris, who's highly critical of behavior modification kind of techniques. That is another way of stopping behavior without having to execute. In his work, he talks about the development in a model Clockwork Orange. And if you're not familiar with a Clockwork Orange, rent the video, rent the DVD if it's available, and watch it, because it talks about some of the problems associated with scientific approaches to punishment. We then move to, and it's worth noting too that in the modern era, the death penalty becomes increasingly subject to scientific criticisms. And what we do in the face of these criticisms, because of problems and concerns about the efficiency and the effectiveness of the system, is we try to create better and better ways to execute, so that we don't abandon executions, but we make the process more efficient. We make the process less prone to error. And that's what happens in the modern era. In the postmodern era of society, best exemplified by the work of Michel Foucault, in his work, he talks about the spectacle of the scaffold, the importance of the language associated with executions and with the death penalty and with the punishment system at large is drawn to our mind. We've developed in modern, where we are today in the year 2003, I guess is where we're at, is this postmodern period of punishment. And we've developed computer-enhanced sentencing schemes to try to factor man out. Positive law kind of fell to the wayside, and we're trying to develop scientific methods of sanction and punishment. And people are talking now about actuarial justice, where the sanction a person receives is determined by some kind of a predetermined grid, not unlike insurance agents use when they're calculating what your premiums are going to be for automobile insurance. Depending upon your age and your gender and the color of your car, your premiums will vary by this process. Scientifically designing punishment based upon who you are more than what you've done. We're at a period right now, I think, where we're developing and designing what I call legal smart bombs in the war on crime and terrorism. We're trying to perfect this system of law to prevent the possibility of collateral damage, executing innocent people. So we've got DNA tests, and we've got all kinds of expert forensic evidence that we can use to try to ensure against the possible inevitability of error. But Camus, I think, is right when he tells us that even these legal smart bombs, even the smart bombs that we're using in the war against terrorism, have collateral damage. There are innocent people being killed every day as a result of these smart bombs. But we don't talk about them. We try to ignore them. We don't talk about the innocent people who are executed. We pretend that they don't exist. And we have politicians who promise us that we've never executed an innocent person under their watch who ultimately become elected president. And I'll talk to you about a possible case where there was actual innocence involved. But the postmodern era results in a form of justice that I believe is hopeless and sterile and inhuman, and that I believe needs to be challenged and moved beyond where we are today. If you're not familiar with the work of Alessandro Ferrera, Alessandro Ferrera has a book, the title of his book is, what is the title of his book? Judgment and Justice. And what Ferrara tells us is that as we begin to recognize through postmodern critique, as we begin to acknowledge that everything in our society is subjective, that understanding the world is something that is interpreted for us by language, that the principle of justice itself has to be constantly renegotiated, that there is no basic understanding of what is just or what is fair, but the meaning of justice and fairness has to be constantly reinterpreted and re-understood. But it's being constantly reinterpreted and understood without a basis, without a foundation of what is right and wrong.